Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a highly complex, fiercely partisan, and honestly a massive geopolitical theory from a recent source called Nixon's Revenge. Now, just a quick reminder up front, as an explainer of this source material, my job isn't to pick a side or endorse these claims. Instead, we're going to deconstruct exactly what this source is arguing. And I've got to say, structurally, it's a fascinating web of ideas. The creator weaves together claims about the deep state, a century of American foreign policy, in this supposed secret battle between American industrialism and British imperialism. It's a sprawling historical thesis. So let's break it down piece by piece so you can see exactly how the author connects the dots. Let's dive right in.
Here's the agenda for today. First, we'll look at the Nixon-Trump parallel. Second, defining the Kissinger doctrine. Third, two approaches to the Middle East. Fourth, the shift from MAD to the Golden Dome. And finally, we'll wrap up with the peacemaker thesis.
All right, Section 1, the Nixon-Trump parallel, targets of the system.
So the source actually uses a recent real-world event to launch this entire historical theory. It opens by citing Vice President J.D. Vance speaking at the Nixon Library. He quoted Richard Nixon's epitaph, saying, "The greatest honor history can bestow is to call someone a peacemaker." Well, the creator argues that Vance was actually dropping a hint here. According to the source's thesis, both Nixon and Trump were targeted by what the author calls deep state forces, specifically because they acted as peacemakers trying to pull the U.S. out of perpetual foreign conflicts.
Which, of course, brings us to a pretty crucial question. How exactly does the source connect this one single quote to an entire century of foreign policy? Well, the material claims that to understand this parallel, you kind of have to peel back the curtain on a hidden century-long battle over who actually controls American strategic interests. The creator asserts that pulling out of conflicts, like Nixon getting out of Vietnam from a position of strength, directly threatened a deeply entrenched geopolitical system.
Moving on to Section 2. Defining the Kissinger Doctrine, a century of strategy.
Here we have the definition of what the source terms the Kissinger Doctrine. The creator paints former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger not really as an American strategist, but rather as Britain's man on the inside. According to this theory, Kissinger's approach was completely rooted in a British balance of power doctrine. Think of, the Congress of Vienna. The absolute core of this doctrine, according to the material, is that you never actually solve a conflict. You manage it. You keep nations permanently pitted against one another so that no one ever gets strong enough to break free from the system.
To illustrate this, the source sets up a really stark dichotomy right at the heart of its narrative. On one side, you have the British/Kissinger model that's characterized by managed conflict, the balance of power, and perpetual war. But on the flip side, you have what the creator calls the true American system, which focuses heavily on economic development, national sovereignty, and lasting peace. The material actually traces this American tradition way back to Franklin Roosevelt clashing with Winston Churchill over colonialism, and it claims this exact ideological battle has basically been playing out in Washington ever since.
That brings us to Section 3, two approaches to the Middle East, from Lebanon to the Abraham Accords.
Tracing this history, the source argues that President Eisenhower operated under that American system. They point to him ending the 1956 Suez Crisis and his 1967 proposal to actually bring nuclear-powered desalination to the Middle East to promote shared prosperity. Then, the author claims Nixon's first Secretary of State, William Rogers, who was an Eisenhower ally, proposed a genuine peace plan for the region. And here's the twist according to the source, Henry Kissinger deliberately pushed the other way. The creator asserts that as Watergate cornered Nixon, Kissinger managed to oust Rogers in 1973, killed the peace plan, and orchestrated this permanent state of managed conflict. A conflict that, they argue, directly led to Lebanon entering a perpetual civil war by 1975.
But the source claims that this decades-old Kissinger legacy is finally being dismantled today. The material points to a very specific date, citing June 26, 2026, as the moment a new trilateral framework was signed between Israel, Lebanon, and the United States. And the creator frames this diplomatic event as way more than just a standard treaty. They see it as a monumental victory over that British balance of power model, basically signaling the end of the managed conflict era in the region.
To back this up, the source highlights remarks from Secretary Marco Rubio regarding this new framework. Rubio's stated goals were to end outside interference in Lebanon, create a framework for lasting peace, and restore prosperity so diverse groups can actually coexist. The creator heavily emphasizes these exact points, arguing that this language perfectly mirrors the old Eisenhower and Roosevelt American system of sovereign economic development. It's framed as a direct repudiation of the Kissinger model.
All right, Section 4, from MAD to Golden Dome, the technological shift.
The crucial point here revolves around MAD, or mutual assured destruction. Now, you're likely familiar with this Cold War concept, but the source frames it in a very specific way. The creator claims that Henry Kissinger intentionally locked the U.S. into this doctrine via the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. According to the author, the whole purpose of this was to purposefully limit missile defense, basically ensuring America remained completely defenseless and perpetually terrified. It aligns perfectly, they argue, with that strategy of managing balance through fear.
The source then traces a technological rebellion against this doctrine. The timeline shows Ronald Reagan trying to end MAD in 1983 with the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars, which the creator claims was mocked and killed by Kissinger's, quote, imperial overlords. But then, the material points to January 2025, when Donald Trump signed Executive Order 14186 for the Golden Dome. This mandated that the U.S. will actually defend, not just retaliate, against aerial attacks. The source notes this effort is rapidly advancing right now, pointing out that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth is currently testing directed energy weapons, with the goal of a full demonstration by 2028.
$676 million. That's the budget the Army and Navy are reportedly dropping over 5 years on the Joint Laser Weapons System. The source uses this massive figure to underscore that America is seriously investing in new physical principles of defense. They're arguing we're moving away from the old paradigm of mutually assured destruction and stepping into a new era of assured defense.
So why does this specific technology matter so much to a geopolitical theory? Well, by deploying directed energy weapons, the military can defeat incredibly expensive drones and incoming missiles using essentially just cheap electricity. The author argues this completely inverts the economic equation of warfare. The old system, which relied on the astronomical cost of conventional defense to keep nations vulnerable and dependent, is literally rendered obsolete overnight by these lasers.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5, the Peacemaker Thesis, Rebuilding the Industrial Base.
The source concludes with a really sweeping statement. They claim that what we are witnessing today is the dismantling of a century-old British war machine, one country and one strategic doctrine at a time. The author's argument is that building, manufacturing, and developing new technologies is the ultimate antithesis to the empire's doctrine of looting and perpetual war. Therefore, a true peacemaker, which the creator argues Nixon attempted to be and Trump is currently delivering, isn't someone who balances terror like Kissinger. Instead, it's someone who systematically ends it by making the nation strong, sovereign, and completely defended.
And that leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to chew on. Look, regardless of whether you agree with the source's highly specific claims about British imperialism, the deep state, or Henry Kissinger's ultimate motives, the material really does force an interesting perspective. It asks us, how do historical doctrines shape the headlines you're reading today? Are the diplomatic treaties and military tests we see pop up in the news just random events? Or are they the visible ripples of massive, competing historical philosophies playing out in real time? It's absolutely a fascinating lens through which to view modern geopolitics. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.